Bumpy Johnson put $1 million on the table for a hit. Frank Lucas turned it down and became a legend instead. It all went down on March 15, 1967, 2:47 in the morning. The phone screamed in the silence of Frank Lucas's apartment. He snatched it up before the third ring. No guessing games here. Only one man called at that ungodly hour. Bumpy Johnson sounded wrecked, his voice thin. The cancer was chewing him up from the inside out. "Get over here, now! I've got work for you." Frank didn't waste breath asking why. He never questioned Bumpy. Dressed in 3 minutes flat. Dark suit, crisp white shirt, skipped the tie. The standard kit for a man who might need to run or fight. He grabbed his keys and stepped into the biting Bronx chill. 20 minutes to Harlem. The city was a ghost town. Even the street hustlers had packed it in for the night. But sleep was a stranger to Bumpy Johnson these days. The agony kept him alert. Lung cancer turned every single breath into a mouthful of razor blades. Frank had witnessed the slow decay over the last year. The godfather of Harlem, the man who held these streets in his fist for 40 years, was fading away. And the whole hood knew it. When Frank pulled up to the townhouse on Lenox Avenue, the front door was unlatched. That wasn't right. Bumpy was obsessed with security. He'd been looking over his shoulder ever since the hit squad missed him back in 1952. Frank moved down the dim corridor, gliding past framed photos of Bumpy rubbing elbows with mayors, movie stars, and boxers. Past the living room that used to host parties big enough for the front page. Past the kitchen where Mamie used to cook Sunday feasts for the organization. Now? Dead silence. She'd left 6 months ago, unable to watch her husband rot. Frank took the stairs to the master bedroom. His boots felt like lead. He knew, deep down, that whatever happened next would alter the course of his life. He just didn't know the specifics yet. He nudged the door open and saw the king of Harlem slumped in a wheelchair, tubes in his nose. A blanket draped over his lap. His hands that had crushed throats and signed million-dollar contracts, shook uncontrollably on the armrests. But the eyes? They were razor-sharp, lethal. The gaze of a survivor who lasted 40 years in a game that buries most players in 5. No pleasantries, no small talk. Bumpy just jerked a finger toward a briefcase on the bedside table. "Open it." Frank stepped up and grabbed the handle. It had some serious heft to it. He popped the latches and threw back the lid. Frank stared at more cash than he'd ever seen in one place. Bricks of $100 bills tight in rubber bands, wall-to-wall green. Frank's composure started to crack. He tried to tally the stacks but lost count after 50. "How much is here?" $1 million. Frank's heart skipped a beat. 1 million. In 1967, that was like holding 10 million today. You could buy a Manhattan city block with that. You could vanish to a tropical island and live like royalty until you died. Money enough to rewrite your entire existence. Frank came from dirt in LaGrange, North Carolina, son of sharecroppers who owned absolutely nothing. He'd hit New York with less than $20 to his name, and now he was looking at a 7-figure retirement fund. "What's the job?" Bumpy leaned in. The motion made him grimace, but he fought through the agony. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial hiss. "I want Nicky Barnes dead." Now if you're hooked, smash that subscribe button, because the next part of this story rewrote the criminal underworld's rulebook. And trust me, you haven't heard this version before. Frank sank into the chair opposite the old man. His brain spun. Nicky Barnes. That was Bumpy's star pupil. The guy Bumpy spent 10 years grooming to wear the crown. Bumpy gave Nicky the blueprint. How to run the numbers racket. How to handle personnel. How to negotiate with the Italian families, and how to stay breathing in a city that wanted to chew you up. And now the teacher wanted the student in a body bag. Why? Frank asked. The question lingered. Bumpy's expression hardened. This wasn't a young man's tantrum. It was the glacial fury of a father betrayed by a son. Because that rat has been bleeding me dry for 3 years, skimming off the top, taking 10% of every transaction and stashing it in secret accounts. He's building his own empire right under my nose, poaching my soldiers, making promises he can't back up. And last week, Bumpy stopped, sucking in air. The oxygen compressor rattled in the quiet room. Last week, I learned he's in bed with the Italians. He's cutting deals to hand Harlem back to them the second I'm in the ground. He's selling my legacy to the very people I spent 40 years fighting off. He's going to put us all back in chains. Frank didn't say a word. He knew Nicky. They'd been in the trenches together. Not partners exactly, but colleagues. Nicky was smooth, brilliant. The type of guy who could charm his way into a vault and talk his way out of a murder charge. Women adored him. Men either respected him or feared him, usually both. But Frank always felt a chill around Nicky. An insatiable hunger, a greed that could never be fed. A hollow space where loyalty was supposed to be. You're the only one I can trust, Bumpy whispered. The only one who can get close enough to make it look clean. Take the cash, clip Nicky, and when I pass, which won't be long now, the keys to the kingdom are yours. Frank looked down at the briefcase. $1 million, a ready-made empire, all for one bullet. But his gut screamed at him. Frank was no saint. He'd put men in the ground before. For the boss, for survival, for respect. In the street life, you either killed or you died. There was no middle ground. But this? This was the cold execution of a longtime associate. A guy who hadn't wronged Frank personally. A man who, despite his faults, was a comrade. Frank Lucas wasn't a contract killer. He was an executive. He used violence when necessary, not for a paycheck. That was a line he wouldn't cross. A line he couldn't cross. No. The word slipped out before he even processed it. It hung in the room like gunpowder smoke. Bumpy's eyes bulged. Nobody told Bumpy Johnson no. Absolutely nobody. Not the mob bosses who ran half the city. Not the politicians bought and paid for by his donations. Not the police captains who took his envelopes and looked the other way. And definitely not from a country boy driver with only 5 years on the clock. Excuse me? I said no. Frank shoved the briefcase back across the desk. The cash shifted inside with a dry rustle, like dead leaves. I ain't touching Nicky Barnes. Not for $1 million. Not for 10 million. I got lines I don't cross. Silence choked the room. All Frank heard was the wheeze of Bumpy's lungs, the hum of the oxygen tank, and his own heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He had just told the king of Harlem to go to hell. That was suicide. He'd be dead before the sun came up. Just another heap of trash in a back alley. Just another corpse no one would mourn. Then the impossible happened. Bumpy smiled, and it wasn't the smile of a shark. It wasn't the look of a man signing a death warrant. It was warm, genuine. The look of a man who finally found the missing piece. Good. Bumpy settled back into his wheelchair. The suffocation in the air vanished instantly. That is exactly the answer I needed. Frank blinked, his brain stalling. He couldn't compute the shift. Say what? It was a test, Frank. I've tested everyone on my payroll, every single man hungry for my throne. I've sat right here with that same case 12 times in 2 months. Same pitch, same $1 million, same hit. Guess what they told me? Frank stayed mute. They said yes, every last one. Ready to clip Nicky just to grab the cash, no questions asked. Didn't hesitate, didn't sniff for a trap. Didn't give a damn if the man deserved a bullet or not. Blinded by green. Bumpy leveled a shaking, skeletal finger at him, eyes locked on target. But you refused. You shoved the payout right back at me. You looked the boss of this city in the eye and said no. That takes stones, Frank. That takes a code. A code is the difference between a king and a thug. Hit that like button if you just realized Bumpy Johnson was playing Grandmaster chess while the rest were playing checkers, because the next words out of his mouth rewrite history. Bumpy reached into his blankets and produced a folder. It was thick, bursting with yellowed photos and documents that predated Frank's birth. Here it is, Frank. The whole kingdom. Real estate, bank accounts, offshore stashes, deposit boxes. 40 years of connections, every favor owed, every skeleton in the closet. My life's work, and it's yours. Frank eyed the folder like it was a live grenade. Why me? I'm a stranger to you. 5 years driving cars and running errands. I'm a nobody. That is precisely the point, Bumpy countered. The old guard has been here too long. They got soft, lazy. They think they deserve my crown just because they've warmed a seat for 20 years. They got fat off my scraps, forgot the feeling of an empty belly. Entitlement doesn't build kingdoms, son. Hunger does. And you are starving. Frank couldn't deny it. The hunger was in his DNA. A desperate need to escape the dirt. To be someone who mattered. To prove a black man from the deep south could build a legacy. That fire was the only reason he was still breathing. Bumpy flipped the folder open, laying out the numbers game. $50,000 a week. A web of runners on every block. Collectors moving with military precision. Insurance policies in the form of bribed officers. Nightclubs glittering out front while the real work happened in the back. Small's Paradise on 135th. The legendary Cotton Club. Places to wash cash, shake hands, and keep a grip on the city's heartbeat. Not just passive cops, but partners. Detective Marcus Williams, the early warning system for raids. Sergeant Patterson, the magician who made evidence vanish. Captain O'Brien, holding the leash for the entire precinct. Politicians whose seats were bought and paid for with Bumpy's funding and Bumpy's fists. A state senator, 2 councilmen, a judge firmly in the pocket. Supply chains, distribution grids, bone breakers, and high-priced lawyers. The works. It was drowning him. Frank knew the man had pull, but this? This wasn't just a hustle. It was a shadow government. A parallel kingdom running right next to the legitimate world, obeying its own laws. But listen close, because this is the crown jewel, Bumpy whispered, sliding a handwritten note across the table. Ike Atkinson, Army Sergeant stationed in Bangkok. He's moving small batches of heroin back home through the military pipeline. No one inspects war cargo. No one stops Army transport. No one pats down heroes returning from Vietnam. It is invisible. Frank stared at the name. It meant nothing. Yet he could already see the gears turning, the potential limitless. You want me to partner up? I want you to think bigger. Ike moves kilos. I want tons. The Italians run the game because they own the French connection. That Marseille link through the Corsicans gives them a chokehold on New York. A 20-year monopoly. But it's trash. Stepped on so many times it's barely 5 or 6% pure by the time it hits the corner. The gold mine is in Southeast Asia. The Golden Triangle, 98% pure, makes the Italian stuff look like baking soda. Cut out the middlemen. Direct from source to street. You won't just run Harlem. You'll own the market. You'll bury the Mafia and make more money than God. Frank's head spun. He wasn't just being handed a business. This was the blueprint for an empire. A roadmap to becoming the biggest kingpin in American history. Or the quickest way to the electric chair. The mob would want his head. The feds would want him in chains. Every hustler on the street would gun for his spot. It was a declaration of war against the world. One last thing. Bumpy's voice dropped, heavy with the weight of a grave. Nicky Barnes, he's coming for you. The second I'm in the ground, He's going to make a grab for the throne. He's already shook hands with the 5 families, sold Harlem out just to get back in their good graces. He'll pay the tribute, restore the old order. The mob wants him in charge because a puppet on a string is a lot safer than a king on a throne. But we can't let that happen. Here's the play. You feed his ego, let him think he's the shark, let him get fat and lazy, let him build his house of cards, and right when he's measuring the drapes for the office, right when he thinks the war is over, you show him what a real emperor looks like. Bumpy slid a brass key across the table. Small, tarnished, the kind of object that guards deep, dark secrets. It belonged to a box at the Harlem Savings Bank. Box 1147. Inside, you're going to find $2 million in cold, hard cash. And the smoking gun. Papers proving Nicky Barnes has been singing to the FBI since 1965. The brass burned Frank's palm like a live coal. Nicky? A snitch? The pieces suddenly clicked. The feds weren't chasing Barnes. They were guarding him. That explains the Teflon reputation. While his crew rots in cells, he walks free. Always dodging the raid by inches. Always lucky. He struts through this neighborhood like a god because he's a federal asset. Uncle Sam's pet. Frank replayed every suspicious moment in his head. The miraculous escapes. The partners who got cuffed 5 minutes after leaving Nicky's table. It was crystal clear now. Bumpy kept talking, voice low. If this leaks, we won't have to lift a finger. The mob will handle him. Wise guys hate snitches more than they hate the law. In their book, a rat ranks lower than a killer. Once they see those files, the price on his head will be astronomical. Every trigger man in the 5 boroughs will be hunting him. Bumpy grabbed Frank's wrist. The strength was gone from his hand, but his eyes were blazing. Swear it, Frank. Build an empire that shadows mine. Make them understand this borough is ours, not the Mafia's, not the G-men's, not the suits downtown who only show up at election time. It's for us, our blood. Frank stared at the leverage, the cash, the secrets, the future, the millions sitting right there. His mind flashed to North Carolina. His mama scraping by in the dirt. His siblings stuck in the poverty he escaped. Every voice that said he was nothing. He locked eyes with his mentor. I swear it. Smash that subscribe button right now to witness the rise. Frank kept his word, and the fallout birthed the most notorious gangster in American legend. July 7th, 1968, 2:17 p.m. The Godfather of Harlem checks out at Wells Restaurant on 132nd and 7th. He was digging into the fried chicken special, same order for 3 decades. Then, the chest pain hit. His skin turned ash gray. He opened his mouth to speak, but silence came out. Slumped into his meal. Gone. Massive coronary. The cancer had already stolen his fight. The heart just gave up. Checked out before the siren wailed. Before he cleared his plate. 15 minutes later, Frank's phone rang. He was up in the Bronx, studying the blueprints Bumpy left, memorizing the ledger, getting ready for war. He felt the vibration in his bones before he lifted the receiver. He's gone. 3 words. Click. No tears. No outbursts. No whiskey. He just buttoned his sharpest black suit. The uniform of a man stepping up to take the crown. He steered the car south. The block was already electric. Bad news moves faster than light in Harlem. By the time he hit the scene, a crowd was swarming Wells. Tears, shock, disbelief. The pillar had crumbled. The throne was empty. Panic set in. Who runs the numbers now? Who holds back the mob? Who keeps the neighborhood safe? Frank didn't ask questions. He executed. Straight to the bank. Walked in like he held the deed. Straight to the vault. Box 1147. Key in the lock. Hands steady as a surgeon's. Mind razor sharp. The payload was there. $2 million, banded and stacked. Generational wealth wrapped in paper. And the dossier. Frank flipped it open. Photos. Nicky Barnes cozying up to the feds. Grainy but damning. Transcripts. Dates. Names. Proof that the Bureau had been bankrolling Nicky for years. Nuclear-grade blackmail. Frank swept the cash and the files into a duffel bag and marched out. No guards. No questions. Just a sharp-dressed man with a bag. They didn't know he was carrying the soul of the city. 3 days later, Abyssinian Baptist, the Cathedral of Harlem. 2,000 souls packed the pews. A mix of city hall corruption and street royalty. Stars, singers, debtors. If you mattered in Black America, you were there to salute Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. 4 decades of rule ending in a box. Frank timed his entrance perfectly. Fashionably late. He demanded eyes. He carried a briefcase, a twin to the one Bumpy used to carry. But this wasn't Bumpy's cash. It was Frank's. $100,000. 5 years of grinding, every cent he had to his name. He strode down the center aisle like he was parting the Red Sea. 2,000 heads turned. He walked right past Nicky Barnes. Nicky sat there smirking, already measuring the crown for his own head. Past the wise guys from downtown, lurking like vultures waiting to pick the carcass. He brushed past the politicians, vultures already scanning the room for their next meal ticket. Frank didn't stop until he reached the front. The casket was open. Bumpy looked peaceful. His face was slack, finally robbed of tension. No more agony. No more cancer devouring him from the inside out. The man was free at last. Frank stood over him, offering a silent prayer. Then came the click of the briefcase. The entire church went dead silent. 2,000 people held their breath in unison. No one had a clue what Frank Lucas was about to do. Frank withdrew the first brick of $100 bills. $10,000. He tucked it into the casket, right beside Bumpy's hand. Then came the next stack. 20,000, then another. 30,000. 50,000. 75,000. $100,000 lined Bumpy's resting place like gold buried with a pharaoh. It was a tribute fit for a king. This was for the man who saw potential where others saw nothing. The man who opened a door when the rest of the world slammed it shut. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Not a muscle moved. Not a lung filled with air. They were witnessing history, the birth of a legend in real time. Slowly, Frank turned to face the crowd. 2,000 pairs of eyes locked onto him. He saw confusion, awe, and rage. But Frank's gaze hunted for one face. Nicky Barnes. Nicky's smug grin had vanished, wiped clean by something raw. Fear. Uncertainty. It was the look of a player realizing the rules of the game just changed. "Some of you think you're gonna snatch what Bumpy built." Frank's voice boomed through the hall. No microphone needed. It was steady, lethal. The voice of a man who wasn't asking for permission. "You think you're gonna carve up his empire like a Thanksgiving turkey? A wing for you, a thigh for you. Everybody wants a taste. I know some of you already shook hands with outsiders. Promised them you'd hand Harlem over on a silver platter. You'd sell out your own blood for a seat at a stranger's table." Frank's stare bored into Nicky. The whole room turned, following his gaze. "You're dead wrong. Bumpy Johnson didn't leave his empire to a committee. He didn't leave it to be scavenged. He left it to me. All of it. And I'm telling you right now, before God and everybody here, Harlem belongs to Harlem. You got a problem with that? You come see me." Silence reigned. No one dared speak. No one stepped forward. The Italians assessed him with newfound respect. Nicky Barnes looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Frank Lucas didn't just walk out of that church. He transformed. He walked in as Bumpy's driver. He walked out as the new king of Harlem. Drop a comment right now. Do you think Frank can hold the throne? because Nicky Barnes and the mob are coming for his neck. And what happens next is going to blow your mind. 3 weeks after the funeral, Nicky Barnes made his play. He'd been plotting this for years, watching from the shadows, forging alliances, feigning loyalty. With Bumpy in the ground, the leash was off. Nicky summoned the heads of the 5 Italian crime families. The sit-down was at Umberto's Clam House on Mulberry Street. Neutral ground. Nicky strutted in wearing a custom suit that cost more than an average man's annual salary. Gold watch, diamond rings. He projected the aura of a man who already wore the crown. Seated before him were the deadliest men in New York: Carlo Gambino, Joe Colombo, Carmine Tramunti. Men who ordered hits like they were ordering lunch. Men controlling billions. Men who believed Harlem was theirs for the taking. Frank Lucas is a problem, Nicky stated, his voice dripping with rehearsed confidence. He'd been practicing this pitch in the mirror for years. He's got zero reach outside Harlem, no network beyond the block, no experience running a beast this size. He's a chauffeur, an errand boy. Bumpy made a mistake trusting him. The Italians sat stone-faced. They didn't interrupt. That was the tell. They were listening. "Give me 6 months," Nicky pressed. 6 months, and I hand you Harlem on a platter. Your control. We go back to the old deal, 50-50 split across the board. You supply the dope, I move it. Everybody gets rich, just like the good old days. Carlo Gambino leaned in. He was frail, quiet, a man who never shouted. But when Gambino whispered, the world stopped spinning. The quiet ones are always the most lethal. "And Frank Lucas?" Gambino asked. "I'll handle Frank. He'll be a memory before you know he's gone." Gambino glanced at the other bosses. A silent current passed between them, a subtle nod that determined life or death. "We'll back you," Gambino finally said. "Soldiers, cash, police protection, but we need proof you can deliver. Take care of Frank Lucas. Make it clean. Make it silent. Then we talk business." Nicky smiled, the arrogant grin of a man counting his winnings before the game is over. Consider it done. But Nicky made a fatal error. It was the same mistake everyone made with Frank Lucas. He underestimated the man. While Nicky was cutting deals in Little Italy, Frank was already 30,000 feet in the air, bound for Bangkok. He followed Bumpy's roadmap, contacted Ike Atkinson, and leveraged every connection the old man left him. Now, he was flying halfway across the globe to seize the source. The journey was a marathon. 36 hours, 3 layovers. Frank had never left the States. No passport, no exposure to a world outside New York or North Carolina. But he wasn't scared. He was focused, hungry, ready for war. When he touched down in Bangkok, Ike Atkinson was waiting. Ike was army to the bone, built like a tank. The guy you pray is on your side when the fighting starts. He'd been running small-time smuggling ops for years. Heroin tucked in furniture, false bottom coffins, personal kits of GIs returning from Vietnam, small potatoes, a few kilos here and there. Enough to turn a profit, but low-key enough to stay off the radar. Ike drove Frank deep into the country to meet the suppliers. They drove for hours, piercing the dense jungle, rolling past villages untouched by modern tech, past poppy fields stretching like a crimson ocean to the horizon. Finally, they reached a mountain lab, and what Frank saw there changed the game forever. The heroin was pure. 98% pure. Frank watched the chemist run the test with his own eyes. The garbage the Italians pushed through the French connection. That was 5%. This was a nuclear bomb, maybe a 6 out of 10 if you were lucky. But this stuff was 98% pure. You could stomp on this product 20 times over, and it would still kick harder than anything else on the New York pavement. And the cost? Absolute peanuts. For a kilo that the Italian mob was pricing at $50,000, Frank was picking up for 5,000. The markup wasn't just good, it was astronomical. We're talking insane profit margins. Frank didn't hesitate. He struck a deal right then and there to buy the heroin straight from the manufacturers. No middlemen, no mob tax, just direct supply. Ike was on logistics. With his military hookups, he could transport anything. Specifically, coffins packed with heroin, tucked in right alongside the bodies of soldiers falling in Vietnam. And who's going to check a soldier's coffin? Nobody. It was too taboo, too disrespectful to the fallen. It was, quite literally, the perfect cover. Frank returned to the Big Apple with a master plan, a strategy destined to crown him the wealthiest kingpin in American history. He branded his product Blue Magic. It was the cleanest dope ever to hit the concrete in New York. 98% purity. Even cut in half, it packed 4 times the punch of the garbage the Italians were peddling, and he sold it for half the price. The streets lost their collective mind. Word tore through Harlem like a forest fire. Blue Magic wasn't just a drug, it was the gold standard. Junkies were trekking in from Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, even Jersey, just to cop a bag of Frank's supply. The queues outside his distribution spots wrapped around city blocks. In 6 months flat, Blue Magic cornered 70% of the entire New York heroin market. The Italian business model collapsed overnight. Their clientele evaporated. Their pushers couldn't compete. Who wants weak, overpriced trash when you can get premium Blue Magic for less? Smash that subscribe button right now because the showdown coming up between Frank and Nicky is going to blow your mind. And trust me, nobody spins this yarn the way I'm about to. Nicky Barnes was left in the dust. The mob blamed him for failing to contain Frank. His big talk about reclaiming Harlem turned out to be nothing but hot air. Frank Lucas had achieved the impossible. He had surgically removed the Italian Mafia from the heroin loop. Even Nicky's own crew started jumping ship. The soldiers Nicky recruited saw the writing on the wall. They wanted to ride with the winner. And in this game, the winner was unequivocally Frank Lucas. The empire Nicky thought he was building crumbled before he laid the first brick. He was a general with no troops, a monarch with no land, a rat with nowhere to scurry. By December 1971, 3 years after Bumpy's funeral, Frank Lucas was pulling in $1 million a day, not a week, not a month, a day. He scooped up real estate all over New York and Jersey, 100 houses, office towers, nightclubs. He bought a mansion in Teaneck that looked like something out of Hollywood. He had the law in his back pocket. Corrupt cops, judges, politicians, all on the payroll. And we aren't talking about beat cops taking a 50 to look away. We're talking detectives, precinct captains, district attorneys. Men who could make evidence vanish into thin air, tip him off before a raid, and ensure his crew never spent a night behind bars. He had a fleet of iron, Rolls-Royces, Cadillacs, Mercedes. He had the women. He had the reverence. He had more cash than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. He'd kept his vow to Bumpy Johnson. He had built a legacy bigger than Bumpy could have ever hallucinated. Harlem belonged to Harlem again, and Frank Lucas was its emperor. But then, he slipped up. The classic blunder that topples every king. He got comfortable. He got loud. When you're sitting on top of the world, you forget you can fall. March 8th, 1971. Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier at Madison Square Garden. The fight of the century. 15 rounds between the 2 greatest heavyweights to ever lace up gloves. Every star, every gangster, every heavy hitter in America was in the building. Tickets cost a fortune. Ringside seats cost a kingdom. And Frank Lucas rolls up in a chinchilla coat and matching hat worth $50,000. He strutted through the garden like he held the deed to the place. And in a way, he did. He had deeper pockets than most of the room and more juice than the politicians sitting in the nosebleeds. He sat ringside. Better seats than the Mafia dons. Better seats than the CEOs. Right there, front and center, for the whole world to see. A detective named Richie Roberts was working a security detail that night. Roberts was a rare breed, one of the few honest cops left in New York. Unbribable, unbreakable, the type of cop other cops despised because he made them look dirty. Roberts clocked Frank, clocked the coat, clocked the seats, saw the deference people showed him, and asked the million-dollar question, who the hell is that guy? And how does he have a better view than Carlo Gambino? Roberts started digging. Nobody knew Frank Lucas. Not a soul in the law enforcement database. No rap sheet. No file. As far as the police were concerned, he was a ghost. A black man in a $50,000 coat sitting ringside at the biggest event on earth, and nobody knew his name. That didn't add up. That screamed that Frank Lucas was somebody worth knowing. Roberts launched an investigation. It took 4 long years. 4 years of tracking loads, flipping snitches, following the paper trail, connecting dots that shouldn't connect, building a case brick by brick. Frank was cautious, smarter than the rest, but nobody is perfect. And Roberts was a dog with a bone. January 28th, 1975, 6 in the morning. Richie Roberts and the DEA kicked in Frank Lucas's front door. They hit the Teaneck mansion, the pool, the garage packed with exotic cars. They uncovered $584,000 in cash stuffed in walls, jammed into furniture, hidden in spots most folks wouldn't dream of checking. They found the heroin. They found the books. They found the smoking gun for the whole operation. Frank Lucas was in cuffs, staring down the barrel of a 70-year sentence. Life. He was never supposed to see the sun again. Hit that like button right now because Frank's next move is the most gangster maneuver in this entire saga. Frank Lucas wasn't going down alone. He remembered what Bumpy told him about Nicky Barnes, about the files proving Nicky was an FBI rat. Frank had sat on that intel for 7 years, keeping it tucked away like a loaded pistol in a nightstand. This was the moment. Frank cut a deal with the feds. He would flip. He handed them everything. Names, addresses, supply routes, dirty cops, crooked politicians, bribed judges, prosecutors who buried cases. He gave up everyone who helped him build the throne. In exchange, he got a discount. He'd do time, sure, but not 70 years. Not life. It was a situation he could walk away from. But Frank held one final trump card. It was the devastating secret weapon he'd been safeguarding ever since that fateful night in Bumpy's private chambers. He handed the prosecutors the smoking gun, undeniable proof that Nicky Barnes was on the government payroll. Photographs, wiretap logs, financial ledgers, the works. It didn't take long for that radioactive intel to hit the streets. Perhaps Frank whispered it to the wrong ear. Maybe the district attorney's office let it slip. Or perhaps the truth just clawed its way out, as dark secrets inevitably do. Regardless of the source, the revelation swept through New York like a wildfire. Nicky Barnes, the self-proclaimed Mr. Untouchable, the arrogant face on the New York Times Magazine cover, was exposed as a snitch. The very same Mafia families that had sworn to protect him immediately placed a massive bounty on his life. We're talking a serious hit with a staggering price tag. It was the kind of payday that had every trigger man in the 5 boroughs hunting for Barnes. Even his inner circle, his own flesh and blood organization, turned on him in a heartbeat. Men he had made, soldiers he had enriched, guys who had pledged undying allegiance, they all clamored for his blood. In the underworld, a rat is the filthiest creature alive. Lower than a killer, lower than a predator. Just like that, the Barnes dynasty crumbled into dust. Every asset, every illicit gain, every scheme he had ever concocted evaporated instantly. By 1978, the law caught up. The gavel came down hard. Life imprisonment with absolutely zero chance of parole. Once the general population got wind of his snitching, his existence behind bars transformed into a daily nightmare. Broken, Nicky flipped completely. He took the stand against his former allies, naming names and shattering lives with the same ruthlessness that had shattered his own. He spent his remaining decades vanishing into the witness protection program, forever glancing over his shoulder, waiting for the bullet that never came. He finally expired in 2012, solitary, obscure, living under a pseudonym nobody recognized. There was no memorial service, no eulogies, no grief. Just the quiet end of a man who had double-crossed the world and been double-crossed right back. Conversely, Frank Lucas did 7 years of a 70-year stretch. Only 7. The intel he traded brought down more than 100 targets, crooked detectives, dirty politicians, and rival kingpins. It went down as the most significant bust in DEA history. Frank walked free in 1982 and went right back to stacking cash, because old habits are impossible to break. The cuffs went back on in 1984 for another 7-year stint. He tasted freedom for good in 1991. He lived out his twilight years in Newark, New Jersey, granting interviews and consulting on the Hollywood blockbuster based on his exploits. American Gangster. Immortalized on screen by Denzel Washington, Frank passed away on May 30th, 2019, at the ripe age of 88. He died surrounded by loved ones, remembered as an icon rather than a trembling informant hiding in the shadows. He went out a legend. Smash that subscribe button and give this video a like, because this narrative demonstrates a profound truth. It is a lesson that transcends the drug trade. Picture Bumpy Johnson, confined to his wheelchair, ravaged by cancer, offering a cool $1 million to execute a hit. He made that offer to 12 separate candidates. Every single one of them jumped at the chance to kill for cash, except for Frank Lucas. Frank turned him down flat. He shoved the cash aside and refused the job. That solitary act of defiance, that split-second display of morality, was exactly why Bumpy handed him the keys to the kingdom. Consider the beautiful irony of it all. Frank Lucas didn't become the wealthiest crime lord in American history because he was a mercenary. He reached the top because he wasn't. His legendary status wasn't forged by ruthlessness alone, but by his adherence to a strict code, a boundary he refused to violate. Bumpy recognized a quality in Frank that others lacked. Sure, he had the hunger, the drive, and the smarts, but he also possessed integrity, a trait that feels wildly out of place in the criminal underworld. Yet, it makes perfect sense. In any industry, at any echelon, the players who survive the longest are the ones who stand for something. A man who knows his limits is infinitely more formidable than a man with none. That is precisely why Bumpy bequeathed Frank the master plan and the network. It is why Bumpy entrusted him with the safety deposit key and the damning evidence that would eventually obliterate Nicky Barnes. Bumpy understood that Frank Lucas was more than just a street thug. He was a monarch in waiting. True kings don't slaughter for a paycheck. They construct dynasties. They outlive their adversaries. They become myths. This is the secret history of how a single word altered the course of time. How one rejection spawned the most affluent gangster America has ever witnessed. That $1 million Frank turned down in 1967 would be worth over $10 million in today's currency. But the empire Frank constructed in its place was worth upwards of $1 billion. Sometimes the most lucrative deal is the one you reject. Sometimes, no is the most potent word in your vocabulary. Rest in power, Bumpy Johnson. 1905 to 1968, the king who identified his heir by seeing who would decline his fortune. Rest in peace, Frank Lucas. 1930 to 2019. The man who said no, the man who honored his word, and the man who proved once and for all that Harlem belongs to Harlem. Case closed.